صل على محمد وآل محمد. أشهد أن علي حجة الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله، لا إله إلا الله. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد.
صلاة المغرب. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أشهد أن محمد رسول الله.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أشهد أن عليا ولي الله.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر، وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر. سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. سبحان الله والحمد لله. سبحان الله والحمد لله. سبحان الله والحمد لله. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. Brothers and sisters, as most of you know, Brother Wajahat Raza is in the hospital, and a few other Mu'mineen has requested for Dua Sahed. Let's recite 5 times the Majib. May Allah give shifa to all, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. عما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه يكشف السوء. 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 عما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه يكشف السوء برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد. Ministers, I will request please recite Surah Fatiha for Muharramin of tonight's sponsors, and include all of your Muharramin also with a loud salawat Allah.
Assalamu alaikum. I will be praying qasr because I am a traveler, so I will conclude my prayer after 2 rak'at. Those of you, of course, who are resident here will continue for 4 rak'at. So if you can say bihawlillah when I finish my prayer, just to remind people to stand up. Salatul Isha. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربنا. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. Brothers and sisters, let's recite Dua Imam Zamana all together. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Inshallah, we'll do ziyarat after Matam. If you can please help us set up the majlis. Inshallah, we'll start our program in next few minutes. Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salawat.
Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salawat. I would like to invite Brother Haider Ali for the recitation of the Holy Quran to start off the program. Bari digar salawat.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات المعاد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد والثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك سوط عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه فنعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي صدق الله العلي.
I would now like to invite Ijaz Bhai for the recitation of Salam. Bar Muhammad wa ala Muhammad salawat. आवाज़ बुलंद सलावत.
बानों की दिलरुबा सकीना जान चल बसी मैलखा सकीना जान चल बसी मैलखा सकीना जान शय की शैदाई और मेरी दुख्तर हो गई क्यों खफा हो गई क्यों खफा सकीना जा सदक़े होती है तुम पे माँ उठो कहना मानो मेरा कहना मानो मेरा सकीना जा दर्द कानों का कैसा है बोलो मुझसे बोलो जरा मुझसे बोलो जरा हाल असगर का अब बयां कीजिए दिल भर आया मेरा दिल भर आया मेरा हाय जिंदाने शाम में तुमको क्या ख़ज़ा सकीना आ गई क्या ख़ज़ा सकीना जान बानो की दिलरुबा।
सलवात।
जबदा गे कसी न सकीना उठा सकी और दर्द दिल ना खौफ के मारे सुना सकी। खाए तमाचे शिमर के जब तक के खा सकी। सिन कामता दुख बहुत न बर्दाश्त ला सिन कामता दुख बहुत न बर्दाश्त ला। रोई तो जालिमों ने जफा बेशुमार की आखे जब्र दे के मौत किया आखे ये जब्र दे के मौत किया। गरिया की तो शिमर पुकारा खामोश हो और चुप हुई तो बेपदरी ने कहा कि रो गे शिद्दते अत से पुकारी के पानी दो। गए याद करके रह गए बाबा गए याद करके रह गए बाबा। सोई जो आंसू पहुँच के चश्मे पुराब से है हुसैन कह के फिर उठ बैठ है हुसैन कह के फिर उठ बैठ। दिल में समा गया था जो शिमरे लई का डर। सोने में कांप कांप ये कहती थी रात भर फरियाद छीनता है गौहर शिमरे बाद गौहर। आता इब्ने ज़ाद जो बुझा के मैं आता इब्ने ज़ाद जो बुझा के ज़ैनब पुपी संभालो कलेजा धड़कता है। सजाद भाई देखो ये गोली सजाद भाई देखो ये गोली सजाद भाई देखो ये जब प्यास लगती रोके चचा को पुकारती दुखते जो कान शाय खुदा को पुकारती। आता न जब कोई तो खुदा को पुकारते जीने से दंग हो के खुदा को जीने से दंग हो के खुदा को कहती थी ने चचाना इमाम उमाम रहे रुलवाने को अधूरे रोने रुलवाने को अधूरे रोने हाले शबे वफा थे सकीना है यादगार गोया के अपनी मर्ग थी बेकस पे आश्कार मिलती थी शाम से वो गले सबके बार बार माँ की बलाएं लेती थी वो माँ की बलाएं लेती थी वो माँ की तस्लीम को फूफी की कभी से झुकाती थी ती बेखता बजब से खता बख्श ती बेखता बजब से खता बख्शवा जिंदा से कहती थी ये कभी वो असीर गाम हो जाएगा कल एक तेरा मेहमान का मैयत किसी की नन्ही सी निकलेगी सुबह हदाम बानों से ये किताब कभी था बचा बानों से ये किताब कभी एक ताजा मौत होगी नबी के घराने में अम्मा लौटोंगी आज अम्मा लौटोंगी आज के बानो पुकारी लुट तो चुक अब लुटोंगी क्या बीबी ना नाम लुट निकालो तुम पर मैं फिदा गौहर छीने तमाचे लगे कांचा खुआर लुटने से मेरी बीबी का बर्दिल लुटने से मेरी बीबी का बर्दिल ज़ैनब की पुश्तनों के सीना से फिगार है पर मेरे प्यारे लौटने के पर मेरी प्यारी लौटने अब क्या लूटूंगी माल नहीं जर नहीं रहा अकबर नहीं रहा असगर नहीं रहा रहने को खैर खाना मिला घर नहीं रहा हाथों मेरी इज़्मा बनी देवन हाथों मेरी इज़्मा बनी देवन दौलत है कौन सी जिसे जिंदा में खोंगे रोना था जिसको रो जगे अब किसको रोना था जिसको रो जगे अब मौत मेरी सबको मुबारक करे खुदा मरते ही मेरे कै सब कुनबा हो रहा जाता रहे बुखार बरादर का बेदवा जन्नत को हम रवाओ मदीने को जन्नत को हम रवाओ मदीने को गुल हो सकीना लेके बला सब की मर गए हैदर की पौधे मुश्किल हैदर की पौधे मुश्किल हैदर की पौधे मुश्किल आसान कर गई
मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Respected scholars, elders, brothers and sisters in faith, Assalamu alaikum. अफजल है शहादत से असीरी तेरी सज्जाद अफजल है शहादत से असीरी तेरी सज्जाद वो शाम का हर चौक शहादत से कम नहीं. Roughly translated, O Sajjad alayhi salam, your captivity and torment is more sacred than martyrdom, because those streets in Sham must have killed you 1,000 times over. May Imam Zamana Ajalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu accept our mourning. May Allah hasten the return of Imam al-Mahdi Ajalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu. And may He make it so that we all visit the land of Karbala soon, inshallah. Programs and events like these here at CFK are only possible due to the support of our sustainers and sponsors, alhamdulillah. For details on how to become a CFK sustainer or a program sponsor, please contact our membership director, Brother Asif Patel, join the CFK WhatsApp group, or visit ckdfw.org. Let us now recite Surah Fatiha for the marhumin of tonight's sponsors. Marhum Sayyid Mahdi Hussain, Marhuma Qamarun Nisa Begum, Marhum Khurshid Mirza, Marhuma Mehrun Nisa Begum, Marhum Mir Naqi Ali, Marhumin of the anonymous donors, Marhumin who don't have anyone to pray for them, all our Marhumin and the Marhumin of the Ummah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Brief reminder for the upcoming weekend's programs. We are here proud to host our guest speaker for this weekend, Sayyid Suleman Ali Hassan. We have a majlis program scheduled for tomorrow night as well, inshallah. The program will start at 8 p.m. with Salatul Maghribain like today, followed by the recitation of the Holy Quran, Soza Salam, and a speech by Sayyid Suleman, and end with Matam Zari and Ziyarat, inshallah. Please note, CFK programs continue to be restricted to vaccinated individuals, ages 12 and up only, keeping in mind the high community transmission rates, especially in young children. We are thankful for everyone's continued understanding and adherence to the SOPs. CFK is hosting a Dinner with the Alims program organized by the Dallas Youth Group tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. inshallah, which will include Sheikh Mahdi Rastani, Sheikh Amin Rastani, and Sayyid Suleman Ali Hassan. For registration information, please see the CFK and DYG announcement WhatsApp groups. Please note this program is open to vaccinated brothers and sisters ages 15 and up. CFK is also hosting a Girl Scout Majlis on Sunday at 5 p.m. inshallah. For program details and safety guidelines, please visit the CFK WhatsApp group. An upcoming Boys Scouts Majlis is also being held here at CFK and is scheduled for next Saturday. That is September 18th at 4:30 p.m. inshallah. Sign-ups for that are open. Details on the CFK WhatsApp group. One other announcement, CFK is accepting financial donations for the aid of our Afghan refugee brothers and sisters. The financial donations collected will be forwarded to Comfort Aid International and DFW Refugee Outreach Services after Arba'in, inshallah. For those who are willing, please make the donations by the week ending September 26th, inshallah. For volunteers willing to donate time and donations in kind, please join the local Who is Hussein team. For details on how to make a financial donation or join the Who is Hussein team, please visit our CFK WhatsApp group. For Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, salawat. I would now like to invite Sayyid Suleman to please ascend to the member. Bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, salawat.
Surah Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات Respected Maulana, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is an honor and a privilege to be in your company during these 2 nights for a gathering of remembrance and commemoration of the greatest story of sacrifice and service to God and religion and humanity and the cause of justice that human history has ever seen. And that is a privilege for all of us to be familiar with that story and to be inspired by that story. And no matter how much we may thank Allah for letting us know Imam Hussein and the mission of Imam Hussein, those words of gratitude, that expression, that presence that we have in these gatherings as an expression of gratitude, it is insufficient in comparison to the blessing that Allah has given us. And I pray, inshallah, that our lives will remain illuminated by the message of Imam Hussein and by the inspiration that we get from his message and from our connection to his message. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As you know, Imam Hussein said that my message is for Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar. It is to command what is good and to forbid what is evil. That is one summary that we can give of what the message of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was. It wasn't about a disagreement over who should be the Khalifa or the Imam or the leader of the Muslim Ummah, as many historians, Muslim and non-Muslim, have mistakenly assumed. Even sometimes those people whose sympathies are with Imam Hussein, they wrongly assume that it was a political movement about the leadership of the Muslim Ummah. And that is wrong. It was a religious and a spiritual movement to save the heart and the soul and the essence of Islam. And of course, that has a public aspect, it has a political aspect, it has a social aspect, but it is not just a social movement. It is not just a political movement. And that is one of the challenges that we who live in a secular society, in a non-spiritual society, we face. Because whenever we think about the reality of a movement for reform, for renewal, for improving what is wrong in society, our thoughts will always go to what is on the outside. There's everything wrong in society, and so some people will find a political party or a candidate, and they'll put their heart and soul in advocating for that candidate. And then some people will get disenchanted, maybe after having put that effort, or maybe just looking at things from afar and studying history, and they'll say they're all the same. In the end, they all sell out. And both of them are wrong. The person who puts their heart and soul into politics and thinking that everything will be solved if we just get this candidate elected, they're wrong. But by the very same token, the person who says that politics is just a dirty game and everybody is a sellout and you shouldn't have any kind of attention or using of your time and your resources in that element, they are also wrong. And the mistake that they are both making is that they are giving importance to politics. Sometimes even the avoidance is a sign that you are giving importance to something by avoiding it. Let's say, for example, that you and I got into a terrible fight, and then I happened to meet you at a family gathering, a wedding, a community program, and now because I am angry with you, or maybe I'm afraid that you're going to insult me or say something that's going to embarrass me, I'm going to avoid you. And so you walk in front of me and I pretend that I didn't notice you. You come in one direction and I avoid you. Superficially, I'm ignoring you. But in reality, the way that I am ignoring you and denying you shows that you are the center of my attention. And that's how many of us, we think that we are better than politics, or we are bigger than politics, but our very animosity and avoidance of politics is a sign that we can only think in political terms. When in reality, the call of our religion, the message that should animate us and inspire us, is far deeper and more profound than anything in politics. And then, if politics can be a tool for us to prevent one evil or to acquire one religious or good outcome, then we will be very comfortable and able to use it without becoming political animals and succumbing to the nature and the logic of that institution. This is a challenge that you and I have to face living in a society where politics is everything. And more generally, the external aspect of an action is everything. And the internal and the deeper and the real aspect of an action is to be ignored or denied. And our orientation is the exact opposite. And we learn this from Ahlul Bayt and from Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And that's why I want us to frame our discussion in view of this verse, a portion of Surah Al Imran, verse 110. Kuntum khayra ummah. Now there's different translations. I will give kind of a general and not a precise translation because we want to discuss the different aspects of the meaning of this verse. Kuntum khayra ummah. Kuntum in Arabic literally means you were. But sometimes it can mean you are. And that depends on the context. In English, we have a very clear distinction between past and present and future. But the logic of classical Arabic is not chronological, but rather it is the certainty and definiteness or the uncertainty and indefiniteness of an action. And so that which we call past in Arabic is a definite verb, because the thing that we are sure of is that which has happened. In terms of our familiarity and our knowledge, there's no doubt. It's there or it's not there. It happened or it didn't happen. I may know or I may not know about it, but the action is solid. And the present and the future are the opposite. I might be doing something, but who knows if it's going to get done. Or I might plan to do something, but 'tis many a slip twixt the cup and the lip. Cup is in my hand, I'm going to drink, and before it comes to my lips, something can intervene and prevent me from actually being able to even do something so simple as sip a glass of water that's in my hand and in my power. And so the future and the present are imperfect, indefinite, uncertain, and the past is certain. We have some elements of this in English, although it's not common in English. But for example, if you tell me, will you take care of this? Can I count on you? I might say, it's done. And when I say it's done, what do I mean? I'm going to do it. But I'm using the word of the past in order to indicate that it's definitive. Don't need to worry about it. And doubt, rest easy, it's taken care of. So in English, we sometimes use this, but in Arabic, it's not just sometimes, it's a feature of the language itself. So some Mufassirin have said, Kuntum khayra ummatin does not mean you were the best ummah. It means you are the best ummah. Because this attribute is so closely associated with our existence that it's as if it is a part of us. It's definite, and so the past is used kind of like we might say, consider this done, decreed, and eternally true. You are the best ummah. And why? تأمرون بالمعروف. You enjoin what is good. وتنهون عن المنكر. And you forbid what is evil. وتؤمنون بالله. And you have faith in God. But then there is another perspective and an objection that comes to this understanding. And it's a question that might come into many of your minds. And it's also found in some ahadith, which is, how can this be the greatest ummah? When at those times when Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar were most needed, you'll find very few people who will stand up and perform it. Saqifa took place. And my concern is not whether the choice that was reached at Saqifa was right or wrong. Because everybody in the Islamic community has their own loyalty. So somebody who has a loyalty to Abu Bakr will say that was the best choice. Somebody who has a loyalty to Imam Ali will say that was the wrong choice. And that's a discussion, it's a valid discussion. Respectfully, Muslims can have that discussion. But ignoring that, what every Muslim should be able to agree. Sunni, Shia, favorably disposed to Abu Bakr, unfavorably disposed to Abu Bakr and his candidacy as a Khalifa or a leader of the Muslims, whoever you might be, if you are a Muslim, one thing that we should all agree upon, before we even discuss, was it the right or the wrong decision, is that the way the choice was made in Saqifa was according to the principles of Jahiliyyah, not according to the principles of Islam. That's the first question. Now you might say that, yes, we did it all wrong, but it ended up to be the right decision. And if you understand that it was done wrong, then it will actually help you understand whether it was the right decision or not. Because in the logic of Islam, if you're doing something wrong, it can't be the right decision. This is why if I go and I use false testimony in order to try to convince somebody to believe in God, then I can't say that, well, the end result was good. That is a sin and not a good result that resulted from an evil action. So, approaching the first question actually helps us understand the second question, which is, was this the right decision or was it the wrong decision? Because if it was the wrong way, then it cannot be the right decision. It's not sustainable and it is not blessed. إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. Allah only accepts from those who are pious. And pious means you do things the right way, not just that you get to what you think is superficially the right result. But let's start from that initial question, was this the right way? Well, one easy answer is that one of the heroes of Saqifa was the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab. And he himself says, كانت بيعة أبي بكر فلتة وقى الله شرها. Falta means when you trip on something and you fall. So a precipitous, ill-considered, kind of inauspicious action, that's falta. وَقَى اللَّهُ شَرَّهَا. You'd assume that an ill-considered and a precipitous action is going to have an evil result. But according to the view of Umar ibn al-Khattab, وَقَى اللَّهُ شَرَّهَا. Allah prevented that evil from actually afflicting the Muslims. And then this hadith continues that if anybody does it again, kill that person. That's how evil this procedure was in the eyes of not me, not Imam Ja'far Sadiq, not Imam Ali, but one of those people who was present, was an active participant, and was a beneficiary of Saqifa. In fact, the one person who had the greatest effect in whatever outcome resulted from Saqifa, he says, فَمَنْ عَادَ لِمِثْلِهِ فَاقْتُلُوهُ. If somebody does this again, that person is worthy of death. Because that will create fitna and it will create harm in society. But we don't have to take somebody's word for it, even if that person is a participant in Saqifa who knows more than anyone else what took place. Just look at the logic. Even today, if Allah inshallah ends this scourge of COVID, people are able to go for Hajj and Umrah, even today, you can go visit Saqifa Bani Sa'ida. Out of all of the sites that have been destroyed, the house where our Prophet was born, Shi'b Abi Talib, where he spent 3 years with his closest companions in a siege, defending the cause of truth when the entire world was against them. Those sacred sites, those venerable sites in Mecca and in Medina and in the areas around Hijaz, out of all of the ones that have been destroyed, for some reason, Saqifa Bani Sa'ida has been preserved. And now, I don't know what wisdom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had that this one, even the enemy doesn't realize what the meaning of preserving Saqifa is. If you go to Medina, you can see a sign. Saqifa Bani Sa'ida. This is where it all started. What all started? Of course, people can have different views. And we owe it to our fellow Muslims, one, not to avoid discussing it, and two, not to discuss it in a triumphalist or in an arrogant manner. It is important to discuss because truly this is where all began, at least in terms of the trajectory of the ummah that we are still living with today. But we owe it to our fellow Muslims to do so in a respectful and in a humble manner, because we are not going to impose our conclusions on anyone else. We want to share what was the message of Ahlul Bayt and what were the reasons why Ahlul Bayt said that we're not going to compromise on certain issues when they were willing to compromise and willing to sacrifice on so much, why they took a stand on certain issues. That's important for us to preserve and to convey to others as well, even if we want to do so without any kind of antagonism or animosity or triumphalism or any kind of judgment of somebody who may have a different view. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So why did I say that the preservation of Saqifa is the first sign that this was a Jahili custom? Because where is Saqifa? You can go. You can come to Masjidun Nabi and then go to Jannatul Baqi'. And then you can go about a little less than a kilometer away and you will see Saqifa Bani Sa'ida. The first evidence that we have that this is not a prophetic or an Islamic procedure, but rather it is a Jahili custom, is that we have 10 years of the Prophet's life in Medina. Whenever any issue came that affected the communal life of the Muslims, where was it decided? There was a call made, as-salata jami'ah. There is a general call to come to the masjid. And that was the center of the communal and the civic and the religious life of the Muslims. As I said, Islam is not apolitical. It's not anti-political. But the political is not independent and important on its own terms. It is part of a broader spiritual religious message. And so our Prophet didn't say that you are to go to that shaded area, you are to go to that shed, you are to go to that corner of Medina where no one knows where you are. If something needs to be decided on Islamic terms, then the center of the Muslim universe for our religious and our civic and our social life is Masjidun Nabi. That's where the Salat was conducted. That's where Jum'ah was conducted. That's where consultations were made by the Prophet about war and peace and about all of the affairs that affected the Muslim community. That is where disagreements were discussed and mediated and adjudicated and all of the other affairs. So the very fact that those people who saw that for 10 years the Prophet made the masjid the center of his religious and social life and message said this is not something we can do in the masjid. That is the clearest proof that this was not Quranic or Islamic or prophetic logic at play. Just like, for example, I might have a vice, but I'm not going to say, Insha'Allah, I'll meet you at the casino. It just doesn't work. Hopefully, the fact that I am used to saying Insha'Allah before I do anything will be that reminder, even when the temptation is there, that don't go to the casino. But if I, God forbid, am going to make that mistake, then you're not going to see me looking like I'm about to go to the masjid. My dress will change, my demeanor will change, my language will change, maybe even the friends. This is another group of friends, not the friends that I take with me to the masjid. So now when Saqifa was taking place, if you see that they are moving from the masjid, it's one thing to say that they were outside of Medina, Saqifa was closer, it was an emergency. You triage where the person has had the accident, not somewhere else. But they were in the masjid. And they went from the masjid to the casino, to Saqifa. That tells us what their own logic was about this decision. And now this is not, again, something that I am saying disdainfully. You can actually go to Medina even today, and you will see the sign. This is it's not Saqifa anymore, there's no roof. It's a park, yes. The place is there, and there is a sign. You can see it. And then you can walk from there to the masjid. And with every step, you will appreciate that this is a historical sign of the divergence between Quranic and prophetic logic and procedure, and the procedure and the logic of Saqifa. And then look at what happened in Saqifa. I just spent some time on that because anybody, Sunni, Shia, Muslim, non-Muslim, in fact, you can even go to Google Maps and type in Masjidun Nabi and type in Saqifa, and you'll be able to virtually see that distance between the procedure that Allah had given and whatever else was being done. But then look at what took place within Saqifa. What was going on? There is a narration that claims that the argument was given that the Prophet put Abu Bakr forward for our salat, and therefore, if he's good enough for our salat, then he is good enough for our political affairs. Now, first of all, this narration is against many other narrations that accurately and in greater detail describe the negotiations of Saqifa. But more importantly, that logic doesn't hold. Because show me one time in Islamic history where any caliph said that this person has the best prayer, therefore they should be the caliph. Was that the logic that Abu Bakr himself used? That Umar used? That any of the caliphs, Uthman didn't get a chance to choose his successor? That any of the caliphs of Bani Umayyah used? That any of the caliphs of Banu al-Abbas used? Let's even extend it and say that if we accept the Ottoman empires were caliphs, did any of them use that logic that the person who is best in prayer, that is the person who therefore is to be the caliph or the authority figure? So this is a false narration. The actual, not only is it a false narration, but in parentheses, let me say that that event is also under a cloud of historical suspicion as to did the Prophet give the order for any one person to lead the prayer? This is also a claim that is made in history, but there is much evidence that that is not what took place. It's not our topic, so we don't need to spend time on it. But what is important for us to understand is what actually took place in Saqifa. And this was that the Quraysh said to the Ansar that we are the tribe of the Prophet, we are the family of the Prophet. The Arabs will be quicker to accept our authority. Now, this is undermining those people who say that the consensus is what tells us that this was the right decision. Generally, the argument against Ahlul Bayt's claim and the claim of the followers of Ahlul Bayt is what? That the Prophet had 100,000 people with him in Hijjatul Wada'. That when the Prophet was in Mina and he wanted to do wudu, a little bit of water splashed as he was doing wudu, and the companions rushed to grab that water and to seek the blessings of it on their own body and on their own face. How could such people ever do something that was not the desire of the Prophet if they wanted to get blessings even from the water that would drop from the ablution, from the wudu of the Prophet? That's the argument that's made, right? How can you claim that Imam Ali was right and that they had pledged allegiance to him in Ghadir Khum and now they didn't do it? Well, if Quraysh is forced to make that argument that we're the tribe and nobody but the tribe and the family of the Prophet has the prestige and the honor to actually fulfill this condition. Otherwise, the Arabs are not going to support anyone. That undermines that whole argument, because it's saying that the Arabs are not willing to submit on the basis of knowledge, on the basis of piety, on the basis of competence and ability, but rather they only want somebody who is part of that prestige lineage of Quraysh. That's the claim being made. I'm not arguing whether the claim is right or wrong. If Quraysh were not jealous, then the Arabs would have been very happy to give their allegiance to Imam Ali. It wasn't the Ansar who were the problem. It wasn't the newly converted Muslim tribes who were the problem. It was Quraysh themselves who used the excuse that nobody's going to submit except to our authority to usurp that authority. But even though I don't accept that logic, and history and the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt and people like Abdullah ibn Abbas don't accept that logic, their own claim in Saqifa tells us that we can't say 100,000 people in Hijjatul Wada mean that every decision that is going to be made is according to the will and the wish of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Are you with me? We're discussing how we can understand that Saqifa goes against the will and the logic of Islam. Now, again, my point is not whether the decision reached was right or wrong, although that's a related question and an important question. My point is to say that I don't care who your candidate is or who you support. If you are a Muslim and if you believe that the seerah of the Prophet over 10 years in Medina meant something, then you must admit that the procedure and the logic of Saqifa was the logic of shaitan, the logic of Jahiliyyah, regardless of whether what happened was justifiable or not justifiable. Because you fled from the masjid there to make the decision. Because the Prophet made his mu'adhin Bilal. The Prophet said that Usama is going to be in charge of an army. The decisions and leading the prayer and giving the khutbah. When the Muhajirin and the Ansar are members and soldiers within that army. And according to narrations, both Abu Bakr and Umar were members of the army, and Umar used to call Usama Amir, because at least as long as the Prophet lived, that 18-year-old non-Qurashi was the Amir and the commander over not just Abu Bakr and Umar, but many of the other senior companions, particularly from the Muhajirin. So the logic of the Prophet was that if somebody is pious, they can be from Abyssinia, they can be from Rome, they can be a freed slave, they can be an 18-year-old youth like Usama. If they are worthy, then the Prophet is going to give them a position of trust. He is going to favor the logic that Allah has given us. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, not aqrabakum ila an-nasab al-Qurashi, the closest one of you to that great lineage of Quraysh, the one of you that can make the best deal with Abu Sufyan in order to establish your government. This is what the Prophet did from the beginning right until the end. And this is in that period after Hijjatul Wada, in the beginning of the 11th year of Hijrah, just days and weeks before the death of the Prophet. He appointed Usama, and people objected. We're going to serve against this person, doesn't even have a full beard. And the Prophet said, you made similar objections about his father Zayd. But he was worthy of leadership, and his son Osama is worthy of leadership, you still haven't understood the logic of Islam. And this statement is mentioned in all stories about Jaysh Osama, the expedition of Osama. One of the very respected scholars of Islam, Hassan Farhan al-Maliki, some of you may have heard that name. He is from Arabia, currently sentenced to death in Saudi Arabia for his integrity as a student of history. He makes a very important point just to honor him and also to pray for Allah to protect him and free him from that tyrannical and oppressive imprisonment that he is suffering. I will mention his historical point in passing. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He says that sometimes it's only by coincidence that you can get an idea of what is missing in history. So many times we have enough detail that we think we get a good picture of history. And this is the mistake. To think that because you have a lot of data, that you have an understanding of what is going on. In fact, this is one of the mistakes that modern media does for us. It fills us with so much of an overflow, an abundance of information that we get overwhelmed. And then we're unable to sort out what is accurate and what is not, and to process it. And we're not even able to realize that, you know what? I know all of this trivia. I don't know what's actually important to know to understand the situation that I'm dealing with. And so Hassan Farhan Maliki, he says that all authentic histories mention that the Prophet said, you who object to Osama, you objected to his father before him. In the Battle of Mu'tah, when he went with Ja'far al-Tayyar and Abdullah ibn Rawaha, and when he was the third commander, Zayd ibn Haritha, the father of Osama, who formerly was the adopted son of the Prophet. But as the scholars, Hassan Farhan Maliki makes the point, not a single history tells us what was their objection to Zayd. It was obviously important enough to the Prophet that he mentioned it several years later in the context of Osama. And if it was important enough to the Prophet, it's probably because they were applying a Jahili logic, and the Prophet was trying to tell them that if I have appointed Zayd, then it is a different logic I want you to adopt. And Prophet Muhammad doesn't hold grudges. You know, and you come to me and you raise an objection, then I'll say, you always do this. Even the last time we were working together, you made all of these different objections, and I might say that because I'm frustrated or because I hold a grudge against you. But if Prophet Muhammad, just days before his death, is saying you objected to Zayd before Osama and now you're objecting to Osama, and Zayd was the right choice at that time and Osama is the right choice now, the Prophet is not speaking out of a grudge or out of a frustration or out of a personal loyalty neither to Zayd nor to Osama. وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. And so this is something important that you and I as Muslims need to understand. How do we choose our leaders? Or more accurately, how does the Prophet choose our leaders, and how does he want us to relate to them and appreciate what competence they needed to have to be given that authority, whether it be for a day or whether it be for a campaign that's going to last a few weeks, a mission to a different tribe or a different empire or a military campaign or a campaign in peacetime, whatever it might be. This is important to Islam. This is important to the Prophet. Not only for me to understand my leader, but also for me to develop those attributes that the Prophet saw in certain people, and he said, you are worthy to be my mu'adhin. You are worthy to be my ambassador. And not to have those attributes, where the Prophet says, no, I cannot appoint you to convey a surah or to convey a message or to fulfill a certain mission on my behalf and in my name. And it's mentioned in every authentic history that the Prophet said something. But guess what? The original incident that the Prophet was referring to, find it. It's nowhere to be found. And so what does that tell us? We have books of tafsir that have tens of volumes. We have books of hadith that have tens of thousands of narrations. We have books of history that are filled. This happened in Rabi'ul Awwal in the 6th year of Hijrah. This happened in Rabi'ul Thani in the 2nd year of Hijrah. This happened in Jamad al-Ula in the 6th year of Hijrah. This happened in Jamad al-Thani, and so on. But that history, those narrations, that tafsir, those sources are missing something that was important to the Prophet. And so they reflect the priorities of that historian or whatever data they were able to piece together, but they do not fully or accurately or properly reflect the priorities of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because you can't even find a hint of what was going on. What was the objection? And more importantly, what was the response of Prophet Muhammad to that objection? But we can get some general idea because we know what Jahili culture was about. You have to be old. You have to be from a wealthy tribe. You have to be politically and socially connected. We know what their criteria were. They're not that different from our criteria in our present time as well. But then, what was the response of the Prophet? Not knowing that and not preserving that is exactly what caused the crises that have afflicted the Muslim Ummah from that time until today. So this was in passing, that the Prophet's logic was clear. It's not about your tribe. Zayd and Usama were not from Quraysh. Bilal was not from Quraysh. Other people whom the Prophet gave positions of authority to, Ibn Abi Maktoum, the Mu'adhin, and sometimes the person the Prophet appointed as a governor of Medina, was not from Quraysh. And Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Pardon me. Was not from Quraysh. Does not even have sight. He was blind. The logic of the Prophet is clear. Was any of that logic present in Saqifa or not? Not at all. It was an entirely different logic. And this is why Imam Ali said, احتجوا بالشجرة وأضاعوا الثمرة. They claimed their authority on the basis of the family tree. But they are the ones who threw away and squandered the fruit of that tree. You don't plant a tree just because of the tree. You plant it because of the benefit and the fruit that you're going to get from it. Fruit trees are generally not planted for shade. They're not planted for lumber. They're planted for the fruit. If you're claiming a position on the basis of the tree, that's not what is important. It is the fruit of that tree that is important. In other words, Imam Ali was saying that you went completely against the logic of Islam. And so, in summary, these are the reasons why we can say with conviction and why we should expect every Muslim to admit that the logic of Saqifa was not the logic of the Prophet or the Quran or Islam. And then whatever the consequences and the repercussions of that are for the legitimacy of a particular system, and we should be willing to accept and own up to those consequences as well. But the clear part is that this was not the logic of Islam. So the question that I asked at the beginning of this discussion, is still with us. At Saqifa, how many people said, أريد أن آمر بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر وأقوم للشهادة لله? How many people were there? Ansar? In their rooms, in their houses. The Quraysh, busy politicking. The new Muslims, what expectation do you have from them to understand or to argue against those people who are senior to them in their prestige in the Muslim community? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Jazakumullah. Nobody. And so the question is, how can kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas mean you are the best ummah? When, forget later on, 200 years after Islam, there's nobody there to stand up for the truth, and a village gets raided and people get robbed. Okay, that happened 200 years later. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi lies unburied. Literally. The Prophet lies unburied. The daughter of the Prophet has not received a single person to say, our condolences on the death of your beloved father and our beloved Prophet. That's how fresh it is. The grave has not been dug. The condolences have not been offered. The funeral has not been performed. That fresh. And Amr bil Ma'ruf, Nahi anil Munkar is the furthest thing from anybody's mind, whether because of fear or because of other reasons. And then, you know how they say that one of the benefits of hitting rock bottom is that you can only go up from there? Whoever made up that saying didn't study Islamic history. Because when the Muslim Ummah hit rock bottom after Saqifa, what did they do? Let's see how far we can dig. See what's beneath the bottom. It's all downhill from there. Lady Fatima cannot even grieve. Her house now is not safe for her. She has to go to Baytul Ahzan. Ahlul Bayt are told by their father that don't cry aloud at the loss of your mother. 5, 6-year-old children. Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, Lady Zainab, Kulthum. Why? Because your mother didn't want these people to know and then show up and claim that they are going to honor her and that they loved her for the sake of the Prophet and for the sake of Allah. So the family of the Prophet can't grieve, can't mourn, can't even perform a burial of the daughter of the Prophet in the city of the Prophet in the daytime. Saqifa was not the low point. It's all downhill from there. And then we haven't even spoken of the martyrdom of Imam Ali in another anonymous grave. The martyrdom of Imam Hassan and an attack on a funeral procession. If a Muslim were to die in a polytheist village, you would not expect arrows to be thrown at the funeral, as happened to the funeral of Imam Hassan in Madinatul Nabi. We're still looking down. And of course, Karbala is in living memory of the life of the Prophet. Imam Hussein said, on the day of Ashura, if you don't believe me and if you don't know me, then the people who saw my grandfather are still alive. Ask them. Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, Anas ibn Malik, all of these people who were companions of the Prophet, they're still alive. You don't have to get it secondhand. You don't have to read it in a book. You don't have to hear it from somebody who heard it from their father, who heard it from their grandfather. You can ask the people who heard it directly from the Prophet and saw the events. And then all that took place in Karbala took place. So the question is, how can Amr bil Ma'ruf be present? and nahi anil munkar be present. If Saqifa and what took place after Saqifa defines the history of the Muslim Ummah. And this is why some scholars, including Allama Tabatabai in Tafsir al-Mizan and others, they have said that no, keep it as it's literally said. Kuntum khayra ummah means that when Islam was in its early days, and people like Ammar ibn Yasir, and Yasir and Sumayya, the father and the mother of Ammar, they would become Muslim. Bilal became Muslim. Miqdad became Muslim. Al-Arqam, Ibn Abil Arqam became Muslim. Abu Dhar became Muslim. When people like that, Mus'ab ibn Umair, Abu Hudhayfa ibn Utbah, sacrificed, gave up their safety, and those of them who were wealthy like Mus'ab ibn Umair and Abu Hudhayfa ibn Utbah, they were living a life of luxury. They willingly accepted starvation. You live in a mansion. You wear silk. You eat the best foods. And then your parents find out you're a Muslim and they kick you out. And now you don't have shoes. And so Mus'ab ibn Umair, when he would travel, his feet would be bloodied, because he didn't have anything to protect his feet when he would walk on the desert sand to go from Mecca to Abyssinia. It was a migration for safety. This is a person who was one of the wealthiest and the most luxurious young men of Mecca. That Prophet Muhammad, when he would see his gladly accepting suffering, he would weep for the sincerity of Mus'ab. These were the people who made the Ummah the greatest Ummah. Not the people of Saqifa. Not the people who abandoned Lady Fatima in her time of need. Not the people who came later and profited off of Islam for their own ego, but not to serve Allah and not with the readiness to sacrifice for Islam. So this is one step forward. That this message cannot be referring to the present and to all of the Ummah, but rather it is referring to a certain state and a certain time within the Ummah, which is more close to the initial state of the Ummah, when people converted to Islam with sincerity and ready to sacrifice. And there might still have been people who were weak in faith. There might still have been people who were even hypocrites, even in the time in Mecca. But the Ummah was defined by the Abu Dhars and by the Ammars, and not by those other people. So this brings us to the conclusion of today's discussion. Tomorrow I will explain how this verse pertains to our time. What is our connection to this verse? Is it just a historical connection that it refers to the past? Or does it refer to us as well? But before I move to that stage of our discussion, I want to just conclude the topic that I introduced. Our society wants to put us always to the external aspect. I've heard from some young people that, we grew up hearing about Karbala and Imam Hussein lived for justice, Imam Ali lived for justice, Imam Zain al-Abidin lived for justice. And my parents want me to come to the majlis, but they're really not that concerned about justice. And sometimes they go to college and they find that there is a student union for every issue under the sun. Environment, war, hunger, police brutality, racism, sexism, any injustice that society sees, there is a cause. And it strikes a great deal of pain in my heart when I see somebody say that the message of Imam Hussein is to be found here. Not because those issues aren't important, and not because our communities are doing the right thing if they ignore those issues, but because The mistake is that it's not the external change that is the start of any solution in society. I guarantee you that most of those people who are supporting those causes sincerely in those colleges, if they can profit off of the environment, if they can afford to get a $6,000 or a $10,000 square foot mansion, they will still talk about the environment, but they're going to fly first class and they're going to get that mansion and they're going to get the second house. Why? Because the orientation is on the outside. We're going to advocate, we're going to pass laws, we're going to do some change in society. The orientation is not on the inside. I'm not saying they're a hypocrite at the age of 18 or 19 when they're an undergraduate and they're a member of that movement. What I'm saying is that because the focus is on condemning the evil on the outside and not on reforming the character of the inside, the trajectory of most of those people and most of those movements is going to be diluted and dissipate. I'm not judging anyone, and I'm not trying to predict, but there is a social reality that we should not be blind to. And if you are a follower of Ahlul Bayt, then don't say that your parents or your elders or your community is hypocritical because they come to the majlis and they talk about justice, but then they don't go to the rally or they don't join that movement. Say that they have the origin. I need to now work on the extension. But don't forget that when you want to devote your time, that origin is more important than the extension. Because all of these problems that we want to solve, they are generational problems. Whether it be poverty, whether it be ignorance, whether it be prejudice, whether it be any form of injustice. I can do my part to alleviate it on the outside. But in reality, it's only going to be solved if a change comes from within hearts. You can pass laws about desegregation. But if there is a segregation within my heart, I come from Virginia. Texas, alhamdulillah, is not a state that has a problem with racism or arrogance or looking down on the Mexicans. But let me tell you about Virginia. We still have highways and monuments and high schools and statues, and we're still fighting the Civil War that ended more than a century and a half ago. And I know you're doing that thing in Texas as well, and particularly Dallas. We might have our own pockets, the society around us, more than a century after the abolition of the institution of slavery, has not removed the institution from their hearts. And the nostalgia for that institution from their hearts. Why? Because there was no focus on the inside. Let me give you a contrast. If America has still not solved the Civil War, it was a vicious battle that took place between Iran and Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of people died, and those people who suffered, they're not daughters of the Confederacy. They're daughters who are seeing their fathers subject to health issues because of chemical attack. The wounded, the injured, the missing, the martyred, that's a father or a brother. And the innocent civilians, men, women, and children are still alive today. But why is that war not still being fought in? Why is that war still not being fought? To a large extent, it is because حُبُّ الْحُسَيْنِ يَجْمَعُنَا. The love of Imam Hussein collects us and unites us. There is still Arab prejudice against Persians. There is still Persian prejudice against Arabs, except Sheikh Amin. there is still all forms of ignorance within. Hyderabadis don't always admire Punjabi culture. And sometimes the feeling is mutual. It's not just Iranians that I pick on and Arabs. We have similar elements within ourselves. But even that Hyderabadi who, when he sees Punjabi, says, "Ye kaise log hain?" can come together and can have a greater unity with them because, with Punjabi Matam and Noha, and mutually. Why? Because there is not just a slogan, but there is a deeper reality. Beyond history, beyond time and place, to حُبُّ الْحُسَيْنِ يَجْمَعُنَا. The love of Hussein unites us. It starts from the inside. Have we solved the problem of racism and prejudice and chauvinism in our communities? Absolutely not. But at the very least, we have the medicine. Now the challenge is, don't look down on your elders and your parents, but take that medicine and use it. If they have it and they just keep it in the medicine to decorate it, the solution is not to condemn them. The solution is to take it off the shelf and utilize it, benefit from it, and benefit others. And that is what happened in Karbala itself. In Karbala, it wasn't just Ahlul Bayt. It wasn't just long-standing admirers of Ahlul Bayt who were present. Zuhair ibn Qayn was known as an Uthmani, meaning somebody who was loyal to Uthman. There was no such thing as a Sunni at that time. Nowadays, some of you who are familiar with what's going on in Pakistan, there is a controversy that was Zuhair ibn Qayn a Sunni who was present in Imam Hussein's camp. Well, there was no such thing as a Sunni. The entire concept of a Sunni developed after the Sunnah was collected and written in books. And that didn't happen for 100 years after Karbala. And the first books were written. Bukhari and Muslim came 200 years after Karbala. 200 years. What do I mean by 200 years? I mean before the British took over Delhi. If we're looking backwards from our time, before the Spanish-American War, before many events that are forgotten in history. That's when the Sunnah became written. And then there was an argument that this person is a follower of this Sunnah or not. Otherwise, the Muslims never had Sunni and Shia. Everybody, Shia or anti-Shia, followed the Sunnah of the Prophet. There's no such thing as a Sunni in the time of Imam Hussein, or after Imam Hussein, or in the time of Imam Ja'far Sadiq, or in the time of Imam Musa Kadhim, for a century or more after Karbala. But Zuhair ibn Qayn was an Uthmani, meaning he thought that the system was good. But he didn't remain an Uthmani, because by coincidence he happened to be close to the caravan of Imam Hussein on the way to Karbala. And he saw Imam Hussein. And he came back to his wife, and he said, "Oh, my wife, I don't want you to suffer. I'm going on a different journey. I'm not going for trade. I'm not going to profit. I'm not going to Kufa. I'm going on a journey with Imam Hussein. I'm going to heaven." And so Zuhair ibn Qayn was Uthmani and became Husseini. This is the medicine that we get. This is the blessing that we get from Karbala. And not just Zuhair, but even more powerfully Hur, the one who stopped the caravan of Imam Hussein from traveling freely, the one who stopped the water from being accessible to the children and the women who were with Imam Hussein, the commander of 1,000 soldiers of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad. The day of Ashura comes and he begins to shake. His companion says that, "Oh Hur, if anybody were to ask me who is the most courageous man in Kufa, I would have said it's you. Why are you shaking?" And Hur says, have you given water to your horse? The person said, I realized Hur wanted to be alone. I left him. And then Hur galloped his horse and went to Imam Hussein. It wasn't a long distance that Hur traveled, but the entire existence of Hur flashed before his eyes, maybe just a few hundred yards from his tent to where Imam Hussein stood surveying the battlefield. But as he came, he slowed down his pace. He lowered his gaze. He bound his hands as if he was coming as a slave. And when he approached Imam Hussein, he said, Yabna Rasulullah, I am the one who did all these unspeakable crimes. Yabna Rasulullah, afatarali min tawbah? Does somebody like me have a chance at forgiveness? And Imam Hussein said, lift your head, O Hur. You are a guest of mine now. It just pains me that I do not have anything to offer and honor my guest with. And that is when Hur said to the Imam, that, O Imam, if I was the first to stand in your way, then let me be the first to offer my life in your path. Imam said to Hur that if you are my guest, then I wish to protect you. But when Hur insisted, the Imam gave his permission. Zuhair was brought to the presence of the Imam. Hur was brought to the presence of the Imam. And how many people heard the story of the Imam? And they abandoned their sin. They abandoned their worldly distraction. This is the power of Imam Hussein. He said to Hur, go. If this is your will, then you have my permission and you have my blessings. And it is said that Hur fought bravely. He tried to convince the enemy to come back to the path, but they attacked him. He fought on his horse until he was injured and fell from his mount. And then he fought on foot until he was no longer able to fight. And one final time, Hur called out to Imam Hussein. And the Imam rushed to his side. 72 times on the day of Ashura, Imam Hussein repeated, this was the first of those times when the Imam rushed to the side of a soldier who had fallen in battle. This time, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas was still alive. And so, wherever Imam Hussein went, Abbas came with him because he never left the side of Imam Hussein. But it wouldn't be long before the Imam would rush to answer a call, and Abbas would not come with the Imam. Abbas would be the one whose call the Imam was answering. The Imam came to the side of Hur, and he sat down, and he lifted the head of Hur into his own lap. And it is sometimes said that Hur was still ashamed. The mention of the mother of Imam Hussein had transpired some days ago when the Imam first met Hur. And maybe Hur would have said at this moment that I am still embarrassed before Lady Fatima. And it is narrated that Imam Hussein took a handkerchief out of his pocket. He said that, Hur, let me wash away the wound on your forehead. Let me band-aid your head with a piece of cloth that my mother will recognize when you come on the day of judgment and you stand before my mother, Fatima Zahra. Hur, hold your head up high and say that Hussein dressed my wound on the day of Ashura. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماتم Hussein.
Brother Salman, Hassan and brothers Jari and Hassan Razi, please come forward.
खड़ी हैराने की वे आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने की वे आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने की वे आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने खड़ी हैराने की में आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने बाज़ारां तो सी पहले आबिद मेरा जवाने की में आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने खड़ी हैराने की वे आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने बाज़ारां तो सी पहले आबिद मेरा जवाने की वे आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने की वे आ गई ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने की वे आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने करो हर तरफ चरागा बाज़ारां नू सजाओ बागी दी बैणाया पत्थरां दा मी वसाओ आ गई है दी अली जी होया शाम बिच ऐलाने की वे आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने 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 करो हर तरफ चरागा बाज़ारां नू सजाओ बागी दी बैणाया पत्थरां दा मी वसाओ आ गई है दी अली दी होया शाम बिच ऐलाने की वे आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने की वे आ गई ज़ईफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी हैराने की वे आ गई ज़ईफ़ी सड़ी है राने कीवे आ गई ज़रीफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी है राने टुर गई है 4 साला बाबे दी पुरसदारे रे हमारे दाता माचे बिनु शिमर बार बारे मर के तमाचे आदे चेहरे ते है निशाने कीवे आ गई ज़रीफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी है राने कीवे आ गई ज़रीफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी है राने कीवे आ गई ज़रीफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी है राने हो कैद शाम गई है पत्थर भी जल्दी रही है ज़ैनब दा बन के पर्दा दरबार विच खड़ी है सैयदा ते सब तो बखरा तेजा तेरा एहसान कीवे आ गई ज़रीफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी है राने कीवे आ गई ज़रीफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी है राने कीवे आ गई ज़रीफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी है राने गलियां दे विच है रुलदा बाज़ारां चों गुज़रदा मैयत सकीना छाके आबिद रिया है पुछदा किते दफन कीते जांदे विच शाम दे मेहमाने कीवे आ गई ज़रीफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी है राने 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 भूलिया नहीं वतन ते ज़ैनब नू गमर दादा मिलिया जो उसनू पुरसा मज़लूम करबला दा गई कब्र माते रोंदी अपने ज़ख्म विखाने कीवे आ गई ज़रीफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी है राने कीवे आ गई ज़रीफ़ी ज़ैनब खड़ी है राने या हुसैन 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 सुना है मदीना सुना है मदीना सुना है मदीना सुना है मदीना आशूर को आया ये खते फातिमा सुगरा सुना है मदीना सुना है मदीना सुना है मदीना
सुना है मदीना
कब लौट के घर आओ गया शाह मदीना सुना
है मदीना
आशूर को आया ये खते फातिमा सुगरा
सुना है मदीना
मैं दर पे खड़ी रहती हूँ एक आस लगाए, भैया नहीं आए। मैं दर पे खड़ी रहती हूँ एक आस लगाए, भैया नहीं आए। शिकवा नहीं अकबर से है तकदीर से शिकवा, सुना
है मदीना
आशूर को आया ये खते
फातिमा सुगरा, सुना है मदीना।
2 दिन से मेरे हल्क से पानी नहीं उतरा, कुर्बान हो सुगरा। 2 दिन से मेरे हल्क से पानी नहीं उतरा, कुर्बान हो सुगरा। दिल कहता है परदेस में तुम प्यासे हो बाबा, सुना है मदीना
आशूर को आया ये खते फातिमा सुगरा, सुना है मदीना।
परदेस में भैया हो अगर ब्याह तुम्हारा, अरमान है मेरा। परदेस में भैया हो अगर ब्याह तुम्हारा, अरमान है मेरा। बांधे हुए सहरा मेरी तुरबत पभियाना, सुना है मदीना
आशूर को आया ये खते
फातिमा सुगरा,
सुना है मदीना,
सुना
है मदीना।
अम्मा की भरी गोद रहे मांग न उजड़े, खालिक से दुआ है। अम्मा की भरी गोद रहे मांग न उजड़े, खालिक से दुआ है। या रब मेरे बेशीर का बाद हो झूला, सुना है मदीना
आशूर को आया
ये खते फातिमा सुगरा।
सुना है मदीना।
खत पढ़ के हुसैन इब्ने अली खूब सरोए और सर को झुकाए। खत पढ़ के हुसैन इब्ने अली खूब सरोए और सर को झुकाए। कासिद के करीब रख दिया एक नन्ना सलाशा, सुना आशूर को आया ये खते फातिमा सुगरा,
सुना है
वो आबिद बीमार था, वो बीमार था, चलने से जो लाचार था, चलने से जो लाचार था। और शाम का बाजार था, और शाम का बाजार था, मुस्तफा की बेटियां मौला हक इमाम हसन या हुसैन, मौला हक इमाम या हुसैन या हुसैन। शबीर की वो लाडली सीने पे जो शाखे पली, सीने पे जो शाखे पली, जिसकी अबारन में जली, जिसकी अबारन में जली, मुँह पर तमाचों के नशा, मौला हक इमाम या हसन या हुसैन, मौला हक इमाम या हसन या हुसैन।
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على 9 المعصومين من ولد الحسين. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب الزمان. الأمان الأمان من فتن الزمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك. السلام عليكم أئمتي جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.